Scripture reading this morning is from the book of Luke, the 2nd chapter, verses 25 through 35, and it's on the insert in your bulletin if you'd like to follow along. A man named Simeon was in Jerusalem. He was righteous and devout. He eagerly anticipated the restoration of Israel, and the Holy Spirit rested on him. The Holy Spirit revealed to him that he wouldn't die before he had seen the Lord's Christ. Led by the Spirit, he went into the temple area. Meanwhile, Jesus' parents brought the child to the temple so that they could do what was customary under the law. Simeon took Jesus in his arms and praised God. He said, "Now, Master, let your servant go in peace according to your word, because my eyes have seen your salvation. You prepared this salvation in the presence of all peoples. It's a light for revelation to the Gentiles and a glory for your people Israel." His father and mother were amazed by what was said about him. Simeon blessed them and said to Mary, his mother, "This boy is assigned to be the cause of the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that generates opposition, so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your innermost being too." This is God's good news for all of God's people.
Thanks be to God.
You bow your heads in prayer with me, please. Emmanuel, God with us. Be in these words and in our hearts this morning, I pray. In your Son's name. Amen. I'm glad that we haven't figured out when I'm sure that somebody has a plan on when we're going to undecorate, right? No? I'm just going to leave it up. Okay, that's fine. Because I've got friends in California that literally leave their live Christmas tree up until April, May. One time it was June. Yeah, it was pretty dead by the time. I mean, like all the leaves, all the needles had fallen off. It was interesting. But I love these two people. So imagine back in the day, a long, long time ago, before electric lights, when people used to put candles on live trees and burn their houses down. So I got to thinking about this. I was going to talk about light and the idea and the image of light and Christ coming, and there's that line of scripture that Cindy just read a second ago about Simeon's discussions about the light to the nations, and I'll get to that in just a second, but I got to thinking about Christmas tree lights and lights on the houses and that sort of thing. And of course, wonky guy that I am, I Googled it and asked Google, when were the first Christmas lights? It's kind of an interesting story, so just bear with me for a moment. I'm going to bore you to death for a second or two. Thomas Edison, of course, was the guy that invented the light bulb. But there was a guy by the name of E.H. Johnson who hired him and kind of recognized Edison's potential and that sort of thing, and brought him on board. Edison, the story goes that Johnson reported that Edison ate at his desk and slept in his chair and literally just devoured as much literature and research and stuff that he possibly could about how to make the light bulb, tried, and eventually it worked. Well, Edison eventually left Johnson's company and started the Edison Light Company, which was the company that had his namesake. Johnson was smart enough that he followed Edison to be his employee and his partner in the process, and was the real person that sort of commercialized that idea of the light bulb. So the story is, getting back to the lights on the tree stuff, 1882, Johnson put 80 handmade lights on a live Christmas tree that he had cut in the forest somewhere, put that on a turntable, hooked it up to a generator because there were no electrical outlets to plug into in the wall, and put it in the window of his store. And people were amazed. A journalist came by about a year or so after that, and Johnson had kept doing this and kept improving just a little bit, and the author of the story, the journalist, wrote this breathless review about how gorgeous this thing was. There must be 250 light bulbs on this tree. Man, you can buy 250 itty-bitty light bulbs in a strand at Walmart for like $1.50. In fact, today, if we fast forward to today, and this is from a Smithsonian magazine article that was just published in December of this year, 150 million brand new sets of light bulbs are sold in the United States this year. That doesn't count all of the ones that are in a hopeless tangle that are in that box in your closet or upstairs or downstairs or wherever you hide those things so you don't have to deal with them. 80 million homes will have lights on their outside, and I'm sure, I don't know if anybody I haven't been sent any of those YouTube videos this year, but Trans-Siberian Orchestra always has a great soundtrack for that one guy who has spent $1 gazillion on the light show of his front yard. And it goes that, 80 million homes. The researcher, the writer of this particular article that I was reading in Smithsonian Magazine said that, and I'm not sure where she got this particular stat, but Smithsonian, you can pretty much believe it. 6% of the capacity of the generating electric generation that happens in the United States in the month of December goes to lighting Christmas lights. 6%. I would love to get somebody's aerial view, maybe the International Space Station can show us a before picture in like November before everybody gets their Christmas lights out, and then sort of like mid to 2/3 of the way through December when everybody's got their lights on. I want to see if the United States glows just a little bit brighter in that moment. But that is just us trying to light the dark. Because the dark's scary. It has been for a very, very long time. We need a light in our dark places. And isn't that why we celebrate Christ in this season, at this time? A week and a half ago, in this place, we celebrated Blue Christmas. Celebrated is kind of an odd word. We remembered, we honored, we lit candles. We fought back the dark. We remembered those people that we have said goodbye to. We remembered those changes in our lives that had made difficult times that we had struggled with during this last year. We remembered those moments that we needed to pay attention to, people to honor, things to grieve. And in that moment of Blue Christmas, we fought back the dark. Now, it was made clear, and Cindy did a great job in preaching that service. It was made clear that the Blue Christmas program, that service, is wrapped around the idea of the moment of the winter solstice, and that's that time in the year when the period of dark, it's the deepest part of winter. It's the night is the longest possible that we can be. And after that point, the days get a little longer, the nights get a little shorter. It's still deep into winter. But that winter solstice is what we remember because it is the personification of light. There's if you read any of the psychological stuff about winter and what it does to us, there is a syndrome called seasonal affective disorder. And it's a real thing. It's people that really are so affected by the lack of light and by the presence of sort of overwhelming darkness that it gets into their hearts and souls. The dark affects us, and we need a light in our dark places. Theologians refer to this moment for the rest of us as the dark night of the soul. And it is that time when we struggle with having enough hope to get us through until the light comes the next morning. It is that moment when we struggle with doubt and concern and wonder if, in fact, any of this hope stuff is real. Because we need light in our dark places. I got to wondering just why we pick this particular time in the calendar year to claim that this is the birthday of Jesus. Spoiler alert, no one knows. No one knows that this is the day. What happened was that there was an early church tradition that said that the 6th of January was the day that should be celebrated as Jesus' birthday. And so after I got to reading some history and some scholars that had written about this particular thing, and the 6th of January was one of those moments that was sort of generally accepted in the very early church, around the 200-year moment or so. But there were in Rome and in other Greco-Roman areas around the Mediterranean, there were some pagan festivals that were being celebrated during that particular time. And by the way, they were connected to that winter solstice. The Julian calendar that was being used at that time, guess what the day was that was named as the winter solstice in that calendar? The 25th of January. And so the early church, at least some of the scholars feel that the early church said, okay, if you can't beat them, join them. We'll move the celebration of Jesus' birth to the 25th of December. Nobody really knows exactly what the day was. That's as good as any. And what we'll do is we'll celebrate that moment, because they recognized what was going on in the celebration of the pagan ritual that was a celebration of the god Saturn. And hear this, church. They said that in that moment, because the next day would have more daylight in it, they called that the birth of the sun. And so did the early Christian church. We just had a little different spelling. The pagans lifted up an infant and recognized this as the birth of the sun, and we lift up an infant and recognize that it is the birth of God. Now, interestingly enough, I'll give you one last sort of gee whiz kind of fact to store away. The church sort of reimagined and redefined the 6th of January as the Feast of the Epiphany. And the church still recognizes that and still celebrates that as well. But you know how many days there are between the 25th of December and the 6th? 25th of December and the 6th of January? That's the 12 days of Christmas. Now, you may have already known that, but that was news to me. I always wondered where in the world that came from. That's where it came from. Because we needed a light in our dark places. Simeon's prophecy in that moment. Let me see if I can actually come up with it. Yeah. You prepared this salvation in the presence of all peoples. It is a light for revelation to the Gentiles and a glory to your people Israel. You know where that comes from? It comes from the prophet Isaiah. In a couple of places, Isaiah, as that Old Testament prophet, recognized that through the Hebrew people, a light would come to the nations, not just to the Hebrew people, but a light to the Gentiles as well, a light to all nations. That was the reason for, one of the reasons for the Hebrew people to exist, to be God's light in the world, that the world might know that light has come. Simeon was literally saying that is the Messiah that we see in this child, that the light has come. The light we have been expecting since the days of Isaiah. When Isaiah writes in the 49th chapter, "You will be a light to the nations, that salvation may reach to the ends of the earth." And in the 60th chapter, the 3rd verse, he says, "Nations will come to your light, and kings to your dawning radiance." Because we have struggled with the dark. Joseph accepted this role of safeguarding the Christ child and recognizing that in this moment that light needed to be nurtured and cared for and protected. He took that child to Egypt when he heard that there might be a threat to that child's life. He listened to the dream when that angel said, "Go to Egypt and safeguard this child." Simeon recognized that this would not go well, and it would not all be simple or easy. In the Gospel of John, in the 1st chapter, in the 9th through 11th verses, the Gospel writer says that the world was made by this light, the world was created by this presence, and yet the world did not recognize. And we loved the dark more than the light. Simeon says this, that the boy is assigned to be the cause of the falling and rising of many in Israel, and a sign that generates opposition, so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your soul too. Because quite frankly, we worship the dark far too often. We welcome it. We think that that's where we're safe. We pull the covers over our heads and pretend that the monsters just aren't there anymore. And if we can keep that fiction going, then we're going to be safe. We know it. We understand that. We've lied to ourselves for far too long that the monsters, if we just don't look at them, they don't exist. And that's the light that shines into our hearts. I've often told you that a pastor's job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And that's the presence of Christ. Because he not only shines light into the understanding that we are light bearers ourselves and created in that image of light, and to share that light with others, and that light should warm our hearts, but it also shows us where we are broken and in need, and need to be saved and need to be healed. And it is that light that is so uncomfortable to the man, myself, and maybe you, the man or woman who has lied to ourselves for far too long and said, the monsters aren't there if I just don't look. Your drinking buddies won't understand when you desert them or when you change. Your friends won't understand just why you're just not quite as much fun as you were before. People just won't understand at all, and they'll push back. Share the light anyway. Because it introduces them to that light that comforts them in affliction and afflicts them in their comfort. And it'll be uncomfortable, and they won't want to hear it, or will not want to understand it. Share the light anyway. I've told many of you this story before. I'll just tell it very briefly now. Many years ago, while our daughter was struggling with cancer, we lived out in Southern California, and we were part of a group of support other families of children who were struggling with this terrible disease. And the name of the group was the Candlelighters. And their slogan, their phrase, their mantra was just this: it is better to light one candle than to curse the darkness. It is your job to be that candle. I did a little research last night, and a quick research, a quick answer, when I Googled just the question, how far can you see a candle? And the quick answer was 30 miles. Now, I read a little deeper and I went a little further into this, and 30 miles is beyond the curvature of the earth, so that's something that's going to be really hard. It's about 11 miles, at least out to sea, that you can see beyond. That's the horizon out there. But this is, the first people, you read it on the internet, right? So it has to be true, right? Mm-hmm. Got it. 30 miles. No, not quite. I dug into an article written in Physics World magazine. I kind of trust them because they're wonks like me, and they said that at that distance, eventually the faintest thing that the human eye can see is a magnitude 6 star, which is really, really, really faint. It takes one candle about 1.6 miles before it gets to that range and then disappears. And that's at sea level with irregular atmospheric conditions and all of that good stuff. 1.6 miles. Now, I don't know about you. 30 miles is like way out of my understanding, but 1.5 miles, I can understand that. I want you to think about something, someplace on the map, some distance from where you are right now. It's about 1.5 miles away. That's about, most of the way down Webster Road and maybe down to your cutoff. Past Cindy's house. She's only 1 mile.
Flatwoods.
Okay, there you go. So whatever your point of reference is for about 1.5 miles, think about that. Think about you walking outside this door, and if you can get a clear line of sight to somebody that's way out there about 1.5 miles away, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the dark, light a candle. That's what God's calling you to do. Because there is somebody that's 1.5 miles away or more that is looking for the light. Because we need the light in our darkness. You may be that beacon that somebody needs, that someone is struggling to see, that someone doesn't even know they need to see, because they've conned themselves into being comfortable in the dark. But you may be that light, that beacon, that someone will see. You know what? I'll go even further than that. I'll tell you, you will be that light. Someone is looking for that light, and they don't even know to count on you yet. Or maybe they do. Maybe they know your name, and they look for you for that light in their lives. It is that love and grace and truth that brings light to the darkness. Just one last personal story, and I've shared this with you guys in the past, but it bears repeating now, that's why I do this. Because in the darkness of losing my daughter, I found the light in a little church in Southern California. And my soul understood that that's what I needed to do. To share the light that I found there and bring it here to you. Where will you take your light this day, this week, this next year? Who will see that light through your heart? Light the world. Let's bow our heads. Gracious and loving God, that dark is awfully comfortable, and we feel so safe under our covers, tucked away in a corner, pretending that we can't be seen. But Lord, you see us. You shine a light into the dark corners of our lives and know us better than anyone. And you love us still. You call us to grace. And you shed your light on our souls. Lord, give us the wisdom and the willingness to share that light with the rest of the dark, comforted world. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.